धन्यवाद. इंग्लिश में थैंक यू वेरी मच. 감사합니다. 나 왜 아예 봤어? 알친구야.
If we take a step back as we rush through our hectic lives hastened by technology and materialism, it is quite incredible to consider that just 200 years ago, basketball and the cardboard box were utterly new phenomena. To put things into true perspective, if the Earth formed at midnight and the present moment is the next midnight, 24 hours later, modern humans have been around since 11:59 p.m., just 1 second. And if human history itself spans 24 hours from one midnight to the next, 14 minutes represents the time since Christ. The questions we, as intelligent and formidable beings called humans, often ruminate upon are simple in nature, but infinitely complex in length and width. Questions like, why are we even here? Or what's beyond? All this seem to lead to even more questions rather than answers. Nonetheless, with an open heart and mind, we can at least embark on the beginnings to these answers, to try and make sense of what it is that we're doing here exactly, on this floating rock called Earth. From Beethoven to Buddhism, life offers curious insights on what we can do with our time here.
Sigmund Freud says that artistic imaginations reflect a desire to make oneself independent of the external world by seeking satisfaction in internal processes. Art indeed is very much a neurological escapist mechanism, but some things are metaphysical. Art holds a very real and sublime nature, one that is interior, inexplicable, and almost spiritual. But unless we study something from multiple planes, we can never truly understand the essence of its entirety. Let us not lose sight of the forest for the trees. A forest holds countless beautiful trees, but if we become too engrossed in studying every individual branch, we cannot forget that each of these trees are merely hundreds and thousands in the forest. We lose sight of the larger picture, the larger theme that we are really trying to answer. Following the words of Henry David Thoreau, our life is frittered away by details. Simplify, simplify, simplify. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Take Beethoven, for example. To quote author Vonnegut, Beethoven was goofing around in Germany like anyone else, and all of a sudden this stuff came gushing out of him. It was music. Undoubtedly, we must take music measure by measure, note by note, in order to conceive and comprehend musical text and essence. But without the element of human experience, without the element of an individual's thirst for knowledge in and beyond themselves, one is limited only to shallow meanings in life. I bow to you is the direct translation of Namaste, a customary salutation in India and especially in the Nepali region of the Himalayas. In Hindu traditions, Namaste has a slightly deeper meaning of I bow to the divine in you, or the spirit within me salutes the spirit in you. The meaning behind Namaste comes from the idea that we are all made from the same one divine consciousness.
Kathmandu is a really interesting place. It's a lot going on, a lot of people, a lot of activity. It was very different than anything I had ever seen, and it was almost like I remember thinking, this is sensory overload. You walk down the street and there's stuff going on at your feet, there's stuff going on up above, coming out of the windows, there are people everywhere, they're all interacting, there's just a lot of activity, moving around, walking on bikes, on cars, didn't seem like there was any lines in the roads. If they were, they weren't being adhered to. The cars are going in all directions, and if you get in a cab, it's crazy. You fear for your life because they obviously know it, but they're going in and out of cars coming at you, and it was a pretty crazy place. I was sitting next to a guy from England who had been living way up in this remote village. He met an elderly man in the village who lived there obviously his whole life and never had really seen much from the outside world at all, anything. I mean, this was the first person really to come and live amongst them. And he said to this man from England, he said, you know, I guess there had been other people who had visited but never really stayed there. He said, you know, I never really knew I was poor until somebody told me.
It would seem quite uncomfortable to abstain from materialistic temptations. Still, unless we separate ourselves from those earthly and immediate desires, unless we suspend our daily cycles of floating from destination to destination, our lives will continue to be governed by time and fate. Thoreau also remarks that things do not change, we change.
What's unique about Nepali Buddhism is that the Buddha was actually born in the region of Lumbini, Nepal. So Nepal has a special connection to the origins of the Buddha in the Shakya clan in the 5th, 6th centuries before the Common Era. And Nepali Buddhism also is very integrated with Hindu tradition, so many Hindu and Buddhist practitioners will actually worship at each other's shrines. Even though the population is only about 10% Buddhist, it's not uncommon to find Hindus patronizing Buddhist temples and vice versa. The Buddha set out on this spiritual journey in the 5th, 6th centuries before the Common Era, seeking an answer to the inherent sense of dukkha, or suffering, unsatisfactoriness he perceived about human life. He went out on this journey actually on a chariot, it's believed, in popular lore, and encountered a dead man, a sick man, and an old man. And despite being born into a royal family as a prince and having all the luxuries and riches of the world, he was disillusioned by this inherent sense of impermanence and suffering that he perceived in the world. So he was seeking a path to how do we liberate ourselves from this experience of suffering. And so the Buddha set out on this long spiritual journey and spent time with ascetics or hermits who had renounced worldly life in ancient India and Nepal, and realized that a middle path between extreme asceticism and extreme hedonism or pleasure seeking was the most efficacious path toward spiritual awakening. The doctrine of anicca, or impermanence, suggests that reality is constantly changing, that nothing is static or stable for even just a moment. Reality is constantly in a state of changeability and flow. And related to that, when people try to attach onto some static conception of reality, they crave for some kind of static thing, they're constantly setting themselves up for the experience of what's called dukkha, or suffering, unsatisfactoriness. If I attach to some kind of identity, I say, you know, I am the best, you know, athlete on campus at Hotchkiss. I am the best orchestra player that this school has ever seen. I'm the best teacher that this school has ever seen. Those conditions of life are bound to come to an end one day. They're impermanent within this institutional context. So Buddhism can help us to live with that recognition of impermanence and change.
Beethoven advises us to not only practice your art, but force your way into its secrets. Art deserves that, for it and knowledge can raise men to the divine. But then again, let us not over-scrutinize the minuscule details of our works insofar that we forget the purpose of why we create. which is to better understand what it means to be here in this world. Let us find the soft balance between examining small units and recognizing larger themes. Let us follow the words of the wisest philosopher herself, nature, who tells us to remember the immensity of our natural world and that we, intelligent beings, are very much a part of it. The rocks in a river may cut the waters, but no boulder or tree can stop the cascade of a river.
But it takes so